World War II, some airplanes were more than just machines of war. They became legends, and few were as controversial as the P-38 Lightning. It was the only American fighter built from the very first days of the war to the very last. Praised by some as the dreaded fork-tailed devil, cursed by others as a flawed design. In Europe, it struggled against the Luftwaffe, but across the vast Pacific it became a long-range hunter, striking deep, bringing aces like Richard Bong into the history books, and even taking down Admiral Yamamoto himself. So which was it? A failure? Or one of the greatest weapons America ever built? This is the misunderstood saga of the P-38 Lightning, a story of triumph, tragedy, and the kind of bold innovation that changed the face of aerial combat. It is the summer of 1943, and the skies over New Guinea are alive with fire. On July 26th, a young man named Richard Bong strapped himself into a sleek twin-boom fighter unlike anything else in the war. Painted on the nose of his P-38 Lightning was a name that would soon become famous, Marge, after his sweetheart back home. That morning, Bong and his fellow pilots of the 49th Fighter Group climbed into the humid Pacific air on yet another mission. But this day would not be ordinary. As they swept over the jungle valley below, Japanese Oscars and Tonys rose to meet them. These were fast, agile opponents, fighters that had humbled Allied squadrons before. Yet in the Lightning's cockpit, Bong pressed the triggers, unleashing a torrent of .50 caliber fire mixed with the crack of a 20-millimeter cannon. Within minutes, 4 enemy planes spiraled down in flames. In one astonishing sortie, Bong vaulted his personal tally to 15 victories. His legend, and that of the P-38, was born. News of his triumph raced through the Pacific, bringing hope to men on the ground and pride to families thousands of miles away in America. The Lightning, with its unmistakable twin tails cutting across the sky, seemed unstoppable that day. But what the headlines did not tell was that this moment, this flash of glory, was only part of a much larger story. The P-38 had not always inspired such confidence. Behind its early victories lay years of daring design, bitter setbacks, and painful lessons learned in combat. To understand how Bong's Lightning carved its place in history, we must go back to where it all began. The bold vision of 1938, when 2 young officers imagined a fighter that could outfly, outclimb, and outgun anything in the world. The story of the Lightning began not in the jungles of New Guinea, but in Washington in 1938. That year, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a daring request, known as Circular Proposal X-608. It called for something no American fighter had ever been before, a plane that could climb to 20,000 feet in just 6 minutes, hold a speed of 360 miles per hour at altitude, and carry an armament far heavier than any pursuit aircraft of the time. To most, the requirements seemed impossible, but to a pair of young officers, Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey and Lieutenant Gordon Saville, it was the future. Kelsey, clever and determined, even bent the rules to make it possible. Since Army regulations limited fighters to just 500 pounds of weapons, he labeled the new design an interceptor, sidestepping the restriction and paving the way for a machine that could pack twice the firepower. Lockheed answered the call. Led by engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, their team proposed a radical design: twin booms stretching back from the engines, a cockpit mounted at the center, and all the guns clustered tightly in the nose. Instead of converging at a distance like most fighters, the Lightning's .50 caliber machine guns and 20-millimeter cannon fired straight ahead with devastating accuracy. When the prototype first flew in 1939, it exceeded every expectation. The XP-38 roared across the sky at over 420 miles per hour, faster than any fighter in the American arsenal. In early 1939, it even shattered a transcontinental speed record, crossing from California to New York in just over 7 hours. The flight ended in a crash landing when its engines iced over, but the point had been made. Here was a fighter unlike any other. Bold, beautiful, and as America would soon learn, burdened with challenges as great as its promise. Yet for all its promise, the Lightning's first test in combat was anything but easy. When the Royal Air Force placed an order for several hundred P-38s in 1941, hopes were high. The British, impressed by its speed and heavy armament, even gave it the name that would stick for life, the Lightning. But the excitement quickly faded once the aircraft arrived in England. RAF test pilots discovered a frightening flaw. At high speeds in a steep dive, the P-38 would enter a dangerous state called compressibility. The controls locked, the nose pitched down even harder, and the tail began to shake violently. More than one pilot bailed out rather than fight the dive. To make matters worse, the British had requested same rotation engines, both props spinning in the same direction, so maintenance would be easier. But this change made the Lightning more unstable and difficult to handle, especially on the ground. Within months, the RAF canceled its entire order. For the U.S. Army Air Forces, the setback was sobering, but with Pearl Harbor fresh in memory, they pressed the P-38 into action anyway. The Lightning flew in Alaska, over North Africa, and across the Mediterranean. Victories came, but so did heavy losses. American escort doctrine kept fighters close to the bombers, forcing them into disadvantageous fights. Luftwaffe pilots quickly learned that if a Lightning pressed too hard, they could dive away. The P-38 could rarely follow without risking compressibility, and so German pilots often escaped, or worse, turned the tables and struck back. Back home, Life magazine ran a story calling the P-38 the fork-tailed devil, supposedly a name German pilots whispered in fear. It was a catchy headline, but the truth was less flattering. Luftwaffe aces like Adolf Galland and Hans Baer claimed the Lightning was easy prey. Others, like Franz Stiegler, admitted it could be dangerous head-on, but those voices were rare. In Europe, the P-38 was fighting a battle on two fronts, against the Luftwaffe in the skies, and against its own reputation on the ground. But while the Lightning stumbled in Europe, halfway across the world, it was a very different story. In the vast reaches of the Pacific, the P-38 finally found its true home. The distances were immense, hundreds of miles of open ocean between targets. And here, range meant survival. No single-engine fighter could fly that far and still fight. The Lightning, with its drop tanks and twin Allison engines, could. If one engine failed, the other could bring a pilot home. That fact alone saved countless lives. And once combat began, the P-38's design showed its teeth. Its concentrated nose armament, the 20mm cannon and 450 caliber machine guns, was devastating against the lightly built Japanese fighters. Unlike the Luftwaffe's tough Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, the Zero and Oscar were fragile. A short burst from a Lightning often meant instant destruction. The most dramatic proof came on April 18, 1943. In an operation called Vengeance, 16 P-38s flew more than 400 miles at wave-top level to intercept the architect of Pearl Harbor himself, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Against all odds, they found his formation right on schedule. Within minutes, Yamamoto's bomber was spiraling into the jungle, a smoking wreck. The mission electrified America. Newspapers and newsreels declared that the Lightning had struck down Japan's most feared commander. From then on, the Lightning became the spearhead of American air power in the Pacific. Names like Richard Bong with 40 victories, Thomas Maguire with 38, Charles McDonald with 27, and J. Robbins with 22, all etched their records in the skies while flying P-38s. Bong became a household name, his smiling face on posters and newspapers, always pictured with Marge, his beloved aircraft. For the Japanese, the twin-tailed silhouette was no longer just another enemy fighter. It was a nightmare. In the Pacific, the P-38 Lightning wasn't misunderstood. It was feared, respected, and immortalized as a symbol of American strength. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Lightning stood as one of the most recognizable American fighters of the conflict. It was the only U.S. fighter produced without interruption from the opening years of the war to its very end, a testament to how vital it had become. And yet, almost as quickly as it had risen, its time was over. The jet age had arrived. New aircraft like the P-80 Shooting Star made piston fighters seem old overnight. By the late 1940s, the P-38 was retired from frontline duty, its place in combat history sealed. But what a complicated legacy it left behind. In Europe, the Lightning was remembered with mixed feelings. An ambitious design that had struggled against the Luftwaffe, never quite matching the Mustang or the Thunderbolt in that theater. Stories of compressibility, heavy losses, and tactical shortcomings overshadowed the victories that were won. For many European veterans, the Lightning was an experiment that never fully lived up to its promise. Across the Pacific, however, the memory was entirely different. Here, the P-38 was a hero's machine. It was the fighter that reached further, hit harder, and brought more pilots home than any other. It carried America's top aces to glory, struck down Yamamoto, and became the sharp edge of Allied air power in the Island War. To veterans who fought in the Pacific, the twin tails of the Lightning were not a burden. They were salvation. That is why the P-38 Lightning remains one of the most fascinating aircraft of World War II. A fighter both misunderstood and celebrated. A machine criticized by some, revered by others. And today, long after the last one left the skies, it still stands as a bold, unmistakable symbol of American innovation, courage, and determination. The P-38 Lightning was never just another fighter plane. It was a story written in courage, in daring innovation, and in the harsh realities of war. In Europe, it stumbled, criticized, doubted, even dismissed. But over the wide Pacific, it soared, striking deep, winning glory and carrying America's greatest aces into legend. But what about you? Do you see the Lightning as an overhyped failure, or as one of the true legends of the sky? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into history, don't forget to hit like to support the channel. And remember to subscribe, so you won't miss the next story of the machines that helped shape our world.